Jolly good morning to everybody. Please be seated and consider the discussion after the session here. Welcome to a session which promising a lot. It's not only the title, if put it together roughly, what will be the future reserve assets we would like to rely on, and how we are moving from the current situation to the future. Well, that's a topic which, as I say, pops up every day in the number of contributions across the globe. But the part which makes it very interesting is that we have three gentlemen here that have all different positions in the past, in the current, which offers a broad range of opinions over here. And the persons who are here, they're clear, they know it well. Joe Stiglitz, he is not only a Brand Economics, Nobel Award winner, but he is, how to say, already, have you received the citizenship of Albert yet? Not yet, because he is here. I think I've been here for the last 10 or 15 years, ever since Andreas invited you up. Then we have, of course, how to say, the heavyweight in banking in not only Austria, but say also in Europe, Andreas Treichl, who was able to create from, how to say, somewhat backward savings institution, an empire called ERSTE, and there is not only the biggest Austrian bank, it's also the biggest German-speaking bank in Europe, and he was able there then together with other Austrian banks to create something which made Austria a near heavyweight in banking in Central Eastern Europe. And my name is Robert Holzmann. I am still the Governor of Austria for the next 8 days or 9 days or so. So I have the honor now to speak in a session. It's not my last one. On Thursday we have a session on governance on the topic, a topic which with the key elements has interested me since the times of my studies. My first original thesis topic was on European monetary integration, but I wanted to do simulation studies. This was in 1972. Nobody knew what I was talking about, neither simulation or monetary integration. So I fled to another topic, which is pension, and ever since I'm fluctuating between both topics, so somewhat of a background. So we decided to talk about 3 topics amongst us for the next hour or so or less, and then hand over to you for your question and comments. The 3 topics are, the first one, what happens with the dollar? Will the dollar remain for the foreseeable time a reserve assets, or what are the threats for the reserve assets there? I think that's a topic which is discussed, I think, every day in a number of articles in the journal papers as well. The second one is then the question, of course, okay, what are the kind of substitutes which may be available? Is it the euro? Is it the yen? Is it yuan? Is it something which is a multipolar system? What are the advantages? What are the conveniences? I think that's a very important topic and allows us to enter a little bit on euro. And the last part at the end of discussing it is, what is it? Oh yes, it's has to do with elements which make the monetary system changing. The system move from typical transfers as we know them and the use of cash into digital digital presentations of money. In particular, 2 forms. The one is the digital currencies, where the euro somewhere in the leads now in order to introduce it. But there's also another form of digital representation which is considered to make perhaps a difference, which is stable coins. And so the question, what is the one, what's the other, what the advantages are not, because they may change the discourse also about the 3 topics. So let me start out now with the first topic, and I will give it a kind of an academic introduction. In the sense is, okay, what makes a reserve currency? What are the kind of things which we have in mind for that? The first one is what it needs to do is to, what we expect is to keep the value. If you invested in it, you want to make sure that the value of the currency is kept for some time, because if the outlook is bad, you want to invest because you would lose. So the question is keeping the value as a major part, and Joe will certainly elaborate on what does it mean for the dollar, is it still there, and what are the ideas that which are floating around in the US, which will not happen. The second part, of course, which makes a currency a reserve currency is the liquidity. Meaning, in the normal sense of economics, that if I do a market transaction, others do market transaction, the market shouldn't break. Because if the market is not steep enough, then how to say it cannot be a reserve currency there. And then a third one is, of course, the stability which is required. And then the other elements there, to get to my notes there, the convertibility. The third one is the convertibility. So if you have a reserve currency, you need to convert it in another currency at the market. And for example, the one is not the reserve currency yet because it cannot be converted freely. And then one thing to consider, what makes a reserve currency, is that if and as you have it, it has network effects. Meaning that it's an advantage if it is used, because if all use it, it's advantage for everybody. This network effect, of course, means then if we were to move away from the dollar, as before we did it from the pound sterling, if there's no network effects there, then how to say, we have multiple equilibria, and this multiple equilibria may put badly for financial stability. And these are multiple disequilibria may be one reason why there are problems. And the last one, which comes to my mind, is something I cannot read anymore. My handwriting has not improved over the years, but over worse and worse. So given the situation there, is the US now on the way down, or what are the kind of things which we approach, which make me think that the US dollar may on the way down? And I thought, now I hand over to Joe Stiglitz, because the US American definitely follows this very clearly, and Joe, over to you for the next 5 minutes.
Okay, so I mean, you've described the characteristics that make for a good reserve currency, a good transaction currency. I think the dollar is going to be partially replaced. Where we're going to go is a diversified reserve system. Symbolic of that is the fact that China, which used to have somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion of dollar reserves, quietly has been getting rid of the dollar reserves, and it's down less than $700 billion. Why? Well, particularly under President Trump, he's announced that he wants to renege on the dollar, and he wants a weak dollar. He wants a weak dollar because he thinks that will help correct the deficits. He doesn't understand macroeconomics. He doesn't understand that the relationship between domestic savings and investment and trade deficits, and he's just focusing on exchange rate effects. And the exchange rate is an endogenous variable. He thinks that he can talk the dollar down, but keep the dollar as a reserve currency. And that's sort of a contradiction, because as you say, you want something that's stable of value. You go and announce that the dollar is going to be worthless, but we want you all to keep your money in dollars. It's a sort a contradiction, but as all of you have seen, his mind is full of contradictions. Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds, and he is not trying to be consistent. I don't know how many of you know about the Mar-a-Lago Accord, which was a proposal from the chairman of his Council of Economic Advisors. Used to be an influential position, isn't anymore, but it is reflective of the mindset of the administration. The Mar-a-Lago Accord was a wonderful offer that the U.S. made to countries to exchange their T-bills for century bonds. So you get a short-term bond for a 100-year bond that would pay no interest. Now, somebody looked and said, why would anybody do that? The deal, and he's all about the deal. The deal is that if you don't go along with this, you will lose U.S. security protection, and guess what? You will be hit by tariffs. So, and Europe should recognize that you're in for, you thought you had a deal with Trump. A deal is for the moment until he puts the next demand. And in my view, it's very foolish of Europe to sign on to that. But the next demand are going to be getting rid of all your digital legislation, privacy, DSA, DMA. But the other demand will be that you make this take up this wonderful offer of taking zero interest bonds for a century as part of the deal. I was in China in March and meeting with very senior people in Chinese government, and just because I like to tease people, I said, "Well, how enthusiastic are you about the Mar-a-Lago Accord?" And the interesting thing is, all of them knew about it. So even if it's not been extensively discussed in the West, they knew about it, and their response is, it's a default. It's an exchange, a forced exchange, and it's a default. They were, of course, not interested in America's security guarantee. That was not part of it. And they were not very much afraid of the tariffs because they have the cards are in their hand. So they were not going to go into accept the century bond offer, and it sort of moved to the back. So the point, I guess I would say right now is it would be foolish for any country or any individual to put all of his eggs in that particular basket. I guess the next part of our discussion will talk about what are the alternatives. But with a president who has announced that he's announced that he wants a weak dollar, it doesn't satisfy the conditions of a reserve currency. And with America becoming a fascist state, it's not going to be a place that will be attractive for a lot of people.
Thanks, Joe. Andreas, please.
Okay. Well, quite frankly, I don't know what is going to happen over the next years, and I don't know because in reality, although politically so much changed with the Trump regime, a lot of the components that make a strong reserve and trade currency have not changed. What we should not forget is that geopolitical power is a component of the strengths of a currency. Energy independence is a component of the strengths of a currency. Military power is a component of the strengths of a currency. And of course, the strengths of the local capital market. And in all those components, the United States still remain far ahead of anybody else. And if you talk about the potential of the US dollar diminishing its importance either as a reserve currency or a trade currency, you need to also think about the alternatives, which we will discuss later on. But to me, the only thing that really has changed is, of course, one of the most important aspects of the strengths of the currency, and that is trust and reliability. And that, in my own personal view, has gone lost. The moment you get the feeling that the independence of a central bank is in danger, you lose trust, because political influence on the currency reduces trust in the currency. That is definitely happening for the moment. So, although we're not supposed to talk about it, I would like to say it now, that the strength of the dollar is also a result of the weakness of the alternatives. And what remains to be seen, to me, is whether the military power of the United States, the geopolitical power of the United States, its total energy independence vis-a-vis almost anybody else, all these components outweigh the loss in trust. I don't know. To me, it's one of the most, economically, what happened during this year, the second Trump administration, is to me the biggest shift in economic reality that I have experienced in my professional life, and I don't know what will happen. My guess is that probably there will be a bit of shifting. So I think, unless, I mean, that we'll talk later on what Europe can do to become a stronger currency, what needs to be done. But I will see that probably the weighting of the dollar will come down over the next years by something like 5 to 10%, not more than that. So all this fuss about Trump and his policy will not result in a major shift. And my personal guess would be that even 10 years from now, the dollar will still be the reserve currency of the world.
Okay, thanks. I would like to add only one aspect, which to say I agree. We don't know yet, which may lead to a situation very quickly. This has to do with the size of the budget deficit, the increasing size which is there, and everything about 100% is a danger, it's not 120. With the new debt, it may get 130, 140, and then it reaches levels of Italy. And then external effects may happen, which in which the trust in the US currency can be quickly disappearing, faster than you think, but this is a part of the shock which we cannot have anticipated. Now ahead, okay.
Let me just say one aspect which relates a little bit to what Andreas also said. You know, the nature of any currency, you know, after you move away from gold, is the fact that you can print more dollars. And that is what gives rise to the worry about inflation, and that is what gives rise to lack of confidence. For probably at least 50, 60, 80 years, central banks have in one way or another tried to convey a sense of commitment not to inflate away the value of their currency. And, you know, I've had disagreements about the extent, you know, the conservatism in which they conduct monetary policy. But we've never had, in a major country like the United States, a central bank that the central bank in the US has not yet changed. But what Trump is trying to do is to change it. Central banks have always said, we want to keep some view about the stability of the currency, and whether that stability is 2% inflation or we can get along with 4 or 5% inflation. There can be disagreements, but no central bank has said, we don't care. And what Trump has been doing to the Federal Reserve is to say, we are going to override political concerns over those economic concerns. So, the attack on Powell, to me, the attack on Lisa Cook has been the worst, because here, a very good economist who is just trying to do her job, and they go into their mortgage application and try to make a federal crime out of that. And that is really, as in so many other aspects of what he's done, a climate of fear. If you do anything that he doesn't like, you may be in prison, or you will spend the next 5 years of your life fighting to stay out of prison. And that's not a good atmosphere. So the central bank then becomes subject to his will, and his will right now is focused on, this is where the deficit. I'm not somebody who's worried traditionally about deficits. I'm not like anybody out here, but but the fact is that if you have as your priority tax cuts for billionaires as the number one priority, you don't like you have to somehow deal with the problem of deficit. The easiest way with dealing with a deficit is to inflate it away, and that's effectively what he wants to do. Now, it's at a difficult time because he's imposing these tariffs, which will lead to inflationary pressures. And so this is a particular moment where you're interrupting with the global supply chain. The last time we had an interruption in global supply chain, we did have big inflationary pressures. And then the question is, with those inflationary pressures and a central bank not committed not to stifling them because it really wants to inflate away the debt, you get in a situation where there's a potential inflationary impact that would undermine the dollar as a reserve currency. I think in the end, Andreas is probably right that we will manage our way through this, but there is at least this other significant threat going on right now.
I want to say something quickly.
Well, yeah, just one thing.
One sentence.
One thing. I could.
No, we have other topics there. I think that what you mentioned now is the independence of the central bank as a major part of for reserve currency, and independence in the US was introduced in the early 1950s compared to other countries. This was also one of the reasons why, how to say, central banker output.
I think we should have the discussion a little bit in 14 months from now, after the midterms 26, because there will be two major changes in the United States next year. The governor of the central bank will be exchanged in May 2026, and there's a strong likelihood that the next governor of the Federal Reserve Bank might be an ex-wrestler, or something like that, who will do what Trump wants him to do, and then, or a crypto king or whatever, and then you have the midterms, and we'll all see with all the gerrymandering that's happening right now. If he wins those midterms again, and he has a wrestler, then we might see what really will happen in the United States of America.
Okay, thanks, David. And over to Joe for introduce the second part about the alternatives Before I give you the floor, we only had a transfer from the British pounds to the dollar, and at this time it was also, it was not inflation, it was deflation, not to say we keep the pound out of it, but the second part definitely was, it was the incapacity to really finance the budget and the economic capacity of the US to take it over, which was the way to the change. Now, how do you see the possibility for others taking it over, or at least expanding it? And what do you think about the multi-polar system? Is it more stable, less stable, which it may emerge? Or you say that's something only in 20, 30 years down the road?
Yeah, so, I mean, the reason the dollar remains so strong is there's no clear alternative. And the reason for that is China has exchange controls, and that limits the ability of China, of the yuan to be RMB to be a reserve currency of the same kind. Japan is too small, and the euro went through a very difficult period in the euro crisis. And so I think that what Europe has done in response to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine has given more confidence to Europe. But I think a little bit Europe's knuckling in under Trump is undermining confidence in Europe, that it hasn't acted with the unity that it could and should have done. So, as I say, it's too soon to tell. My own view is that at the current time, this multipolar system is relatively stable. That people are not going to rush into the RMB. They're not going to rush. They will be moving on to the dollar, but they're not going to be rushing into any other currency. So it'll be a diversified portfolio. The point that you made is an important one that isn't often fully realized. Because of the importance of the network externality, the liquidity effects, one could easily write down theories that say that there's a natural tendency to have one strong reserve currency, an asymmetry in the system. And over the long term, I think that there is that, that unless there are countervailing forces, and in the political realm there are countervailing forces because governments have views about relying too much on some other currency. So I do think that at least for the foreseeable future, this multipolar system would be is a relatively stable system and will continue. Let me make one more remark, which is a favorite topic of mine is the special drawing rights, which are the money that the IMF issues. And 600 billion of that was issued in the context of the pandemic. And it made a very big difference, not for advanced countries, not for Europe, not for the United States, but for many of the poor countries. Yeah, it's 100 billion. The share of that $600 billion was important. There are ongoing needs for developing countries and emerging markets, for instance, for investments in climate change. And advanced countries have not been able to make up for the commitments that they've made. And so I think there should be an annual emission of these SDRs, but with US having the veto power at the IMF, that's not likely to happen. So one of the things I've been advocating is that Europe get together with China, Latin America, and create a new global reserve currency, a G-1 global reserve currency, a new SDR, and use that to, have a new share global currency without the United States, and to use the annual emissions of that as a basis of responding to the other challenges like those of global governance and climate change. Okay.
I like that very much. I actually would like to make a prediction. Because I slept very well tonight, so I'm in a good mood. And today I believe that Europe will become a lot better. Because of that, in 25 years from now, the euro will have replaced the US dollar as the main reserve currency in the world. Just one point on that one. I give zero chance to the one, out of a very simple reason that we live in a very, very strange world where more and more people do not cherish democracy as the best form of government and have a strong belief we need strong men and women. That is not the case with a currency. Suddenly, in a currency situation, people love democracy because only democracy secures the independence of the central bank from politics. And the reason why the yuan will never be a reserve currency for most of the world, even for autocracies, even the Arabic autocracies will not use the yuan because they're scared that the Chinese government can do with the yuan whatever they want to. So suddenly, in this currency situation, we realize that democracy has a really strong value. China is not going to get there. The Indian rupee is probably not going to get there. And hopefully, Europe will realize somewhere during the next 10 years that it's not energy that's the big weakness of Europe, or defense is the big weakness of Europe. It's that we lose our most important resource, and that's human resources. And we need to team up with countries that have positive reproduction rates and give them our currency. So instead of SDRs, I would favor that we give Nigeria and Kenya the euro. We include them into the Eurozone and make a new currency out of the euro. With that, we need to make up the fact that we have a lot of weaknesses. And the biggest weakness of Europe is that the Eurozone doesn't match the Europe, and the European Union doesn't match Europe. Then you think about it, that some of the strongest countries in Europe, economically strongest countries, Sweden, Denmark, UK, Poland, are not in the Eurozone. So it's incomplete. We all know we have not a deep capital market. We do not have a liquid capital market. Those are all the things that we need to create. And I also believe that what is happening now in 2025, at some point in time, will lead to Europe realizing that we need to be able to defend ourselves without the help of the United States. That's the only way we will be able to live in peace with Russia in the future. So if all these things happen, yes, I believe that if you look at the US dollar now, it has about 60% of the world as a reserve currency and about 40% as a trade currency. That will go away, and the day will come when, in terms of a reserve currency, US dollar and euro will be at par. It's going to take a while, but hopefully the two of us will still be alive.
Okay, how to respond to this very optimistic views of it. With regard to the SDR, I know, of course, Joe's proposal. He did it for the old SDRs a couple of years ago. We have said now we put one to them out, why don't you do fight, you know? The more the happier. And as an economist, I believe that inflation is still built on monetary expansion. And if you do this money, then you have the feeling there will be no inflation. Neither the industrialized nor developing country is a nice optimistic view, but I think not a realistic one. With regards to your suggestion, bringing those in, yes, we could talk about it. I think it's nonsense. But of course, we can always talk about it. But where I agree with you, most of it is that the biggest problem for those countries mentioned, euro area, one and yen, is demography. It's demography, which is the worst in China. And here, I'm always so astonished that I was in China in June again, is the proposals, what they have for, I have the feeling, did not really understand what they're up to. And if you take one of the projections for demography for China, it would mean that from the 1.4 billion what they have now, they're coming to slightly about 500,000 soon within the next 75 years, which is of course something which is dramatic and shouldn't not allow them to do so. Now, with regards to the European area, the optimistic, it was great, I would love to believe you, but if I look into how the current proposals are in order to move in this direction, think about what's called now Savings and Investment Union. It's a kind of a rename of the Capital Markets Union. And if you read through it, it has a number of ambitions, but it has not fully understood the problem. The reason is that, yes, Sweden has capital market, but Sweden has a capital market because they have roughly some 50% of GDP in capital market reserves. Denmark, a bit lesser, but a bit more difficult because they're pretty separated market funds there. And Netherlands has a centralized one, but a very bureaucratic one. So as a result, I think, and the rest we don't have it. What Europe is missing, and it won't be able to replace it easily, if at all, is to have life cycle savings, which the US has. They started out with the RISA only in 1973. It has a huge element there. And if you don't have it, you won't get it. Now the question is this the only way to do it? Is it, if you were to have, how to say, able to implement something which create life cycle saving to a large extent, would it be necessary but also efficient? Unfortunately, no. And I came across before China a trip to Melbourne in Australia, and there in discussions with my colleagues, I found out that Australia has the same problem as Europe. We are sending our money cheaply to the US, and they imported it expensively as capital, as capital which buys our enterprises. Australia has the most capitalized pension system, so capital is not an issue, but they have the same thing. They have the same thing, that to say, they send cheap money there and buy that expensive one for the enterprises. So who are the culprits for both the savings unions and the investment in them? Well, and since we have a famous banker here, it's the banking system. In both cases, in Europe as well as in Australia, it is the predominance of the banking system which doesn't allow those capital markets taking place there. And since a bank is here that is sort of put it forward as a provocation, they're not the only one who is provoking. Okay. Sorry, yeah, provoke. did I promote you to be fit? Okay, that's
You want me to answer?
of course.
Okay, of course you're totally wrong, but that's okay. That's okay. But you're not. Okay, you're not totally wrong. We have some. I agree. We have some responsibility, and the responsibility is that we are co-creators of a culture that has differentiated between savings and investing. We're still giving gifts to kids on the 31st of October if they put their money in the bank, and we know they lose money if they do that. So we've been part of the culture that has been telling people for the past 100 years that investing is only for the rich, and for the normal individual they have to save, which is of course totally wrong. That I accept. But we're talking about the capital market all the time, that this is the thing that Europe actually needs. Now Europe from 1945 to 1995 was the fastest growing economy in the world, and in 1995 Europe was the leading exporter in the world. It was the largest consumer market in the world, and at the same time it was the socially most balanced society. So Europe was a huge success story. And if you look back to 1995, there was not one industry in the world where there was not at least one or two European companies on top in all the old-fashioned industry. And if you look back to 1995, who were the largest banks in the world? The Europeans, not the Americans, not the Chinese. It was Deutsche Bank, Nationalbank, Credit Union, and so on. Because, and here you're right, we have replaced the non-existent capital market with bank financing over 50 years. Where there should have been equity, we gave long-term loans. Where there should have been long-term loans, we gave short-term loans. That we did. That's how the banks became so incredibly big. But we did that because we have zero capital market culture in Europe. I don't want to have what the US has, but I wanted to have it much more balanced. With 25% capital market, 75% bank financing, the US has 75% capital market and 25% bank financing, and in Europe we should have 50-50. So I agree with you that the banks are too big, but without the banks getting so big, Europe would not have grown so fast. The real change now happened when we moved from the old-fashioned industries into the intellectual property industries, because in digitization, in artificial intelligence, we cannot lend. And the reason why all the new industries are in the United States, China, is because they have capital, and the European banks are not able to replace that capital with bank financing, because you cannot collateralize Google, you cannot collateralize Facebook, you cannot collateralize. This is something that we simply miss. And if we don't change that, the euro will also not become the strongest currency. So now we desperately need, whether we call it a savings and investment union or a capital markets union, I don't care. But we desperately need it. And if we want to have it, we need capital-funded pension systems, which we don't have, only in the countries that you mentioned, in Sweden, Scandinavia, and in Switzerland. Astonishingly, all the countries that have a capital market culture and a capital-funded pension systems, who are now much wealthier than the rest of Europe, are all Protestant. And all the Catholic, you have to think about that. And all the Catholic countries don't have it. Maybe all the things have to do with the fact that the Catholic Church says before a camel gets through the hole in the needle, a camel gets through the hole in the needle before a rich man gets into heaven.
Yes, okay, Andreas, I have no problem with that. As a Protestant, I have no problem. The problem is, and I think here we need to go back a little to macro. If you want a system which is heavily characterized by an unfunded system, it's a refunded system, you replace, I would say, part of the financing for the unfunded system. So you take, I would say, in addition, so keeping the current contribution rates, And in addition, asking for money for the funded system is a no-go. But if you take reduce the contribution rate for the unfunded system for the funded system, then you repay the implicit debt. And this has been tried in several Eastern Europe. I was there, I proposed it, but it never happened everywhere. I would say everybody gave up. I would say this is the reason why it failed in Ireland, this failed in Czechia, this failed also in Poland, which was in a good way, because at the end of the day, the budgets, the short-term budgets that we need, dominated how to set the build-up. You have it now. So this is the reason. So I'm very much in favor of a funded system, but from a macro point of view, the possibilities to do it will be very much limited. It should be done, but you won't be able to expect to have a huge amount even at 20 or 30 years down the road. So we have to look for them kind of the shortcut, otherwise you won't be able to do it. Do you still have a remark? Otherwise I hand over and over for the last part.
Yeah, what I wanted to say with the success of America's tech sector, I think has some other elements besides finance. Finance was important, but a huge government support for our research universities. And you're making a projection going forward. What Trump has done is been just the opposite. It's destroying our research universities. I think the amount of money involved in venture capital as a fraction of U.S. financial markets is minuscule. It's less than 5%. So one needs to keep it in perspective. It's not like you had this huge savings engine that was all going to make the sources of success in the U.S. And even the sources of success in the U.S. have a kind of ambivalence to them. People make a big deal about the fact that we have these trillion-dollar capitalization firms. And I say, why doesn't Europe have those? Well, one of the reasons we have firms that have a trillion-dollar capitalization is that we have very bad antitrust policies. In a normal competitive economy, profits get eroded by competition. But we have an oligarchy. We have oligopolies. And we didn't do anything about taming that market power. Now, that has led to a dominance of these firms, but actually it's had some very negative effects on our society. So, more broadly, when you think of where Europe will go with the next 25 years, there's no patent on most of these technologies. They're algorithms that any good mathematician would know how to implement. And you have companies like Spotify that are platforms. If Europe took actions to get everybody on a common platform, like using the role of the state that you have to pay your taxes on a platform, then if everybody were on that platform, then you would have the ability you would have that network externality that you talked about before. And I think you could create a safer space and a more competitive space and more innovative space than exists in the U.S.
Well, interesting topic, but I think we need to move on. You can introduce the last part. This is the part on...
Yeah, may I make one more point to that? I think it had a lot to do with... I think the situation for Europe is serious. And I think it also relates to the chance of a currency to become stronger, to really become a dominant currency in the world. 20% is not so bad. That's what the euro actually had. It's the security. And we should not underestimate the weakness that Europe has, because we depend so much on US software and hardware. Think about the fact that 90% of the cloud systems of the European financial system is in the hands of 3 US companies: Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. And only SAP is able to do a little bit. And I think my group has its personnel accounting in SAP, but everything that has to do with risk and trading is either Microsoft, Amazon, or Lyft. And Europe has not been able to build one company that can compete with the 3, and we need to do that. I think that's really important if we want to become a reserve currency. Okay, last point, digital currency and stable coins. I'm not in favor of central bank digital money.
What a surprise.
What a surprise. Particularly if the independence of central banks is not secure. If that is, hopefully in Austria it is secure, so that would be okay, but in the US, I'm not so sure about that anymore. And then to have a central bank that can take in retail deposits makes them, in my view, too powerful. And in my view, if there is one thing that we do not need, is to increase the speed of transfers, because it's already incredibly fast. I can transfer my money to you within a second. So for that, we don't need it. Where we need it, where it's helpful, and that is not so much the digital currency, but the technology behind it. I believe that the blockchain technology has huge value because it can make same-time transfers really secure. So for the whole securities business, for the trading business, yes, that's okay. I'm totally worried about a system where we're suddenly pushing, whether it's now stablecoin or Bitcoin or meme coins, by the United States, because there's so much scam in all of that, and that we live in a world where the president of the mightiest country in the world issues his own digital currency, makes a shitload of money on that, and makes a lot of other people lose money, and we're just not talking about it. And then we're pushing a new world of digital currency, which is being pushed by 5 or 6 tech millionaires and his 2 sons. That just makes me incredibly scared and worried. And don't forget that in the public eye, the difference between stable coins and Bitcoin, and the difference between Ether being backed by a US dollar, treasury notes, things like that. People don't differentiate, and they're getting into a world in which the normal people will lose money, and the relatively small group of people is going to make an enormous amount of money.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, because it highlights the importance of an independent central banker in people like us and Mrs. Niederländer and others, in order to explain and also interact with the banking system, because the digitalization won't go away. First point, I fully agree with you that the use of distributed ledger for wholesale investment, something which is really to welcome, because this allows to have a much cheaper way in order to transfer huge amounts of money. Because if you have want to send 200 million euros from one bank to the other bank, the current way is quite complicated, I think expensive. If you do it with a ledger system, then how to say it's working. And here all countries are working on it, and very soon there will be a uniform European system in order to do it, and that's a equation. The other part, I think this is a part where, and here comes now the new person who is in charge now of digital currencies. They're not perfect. I was waiting for you, you know, and try to drag it on until you hear now. Welcome. Is to make the differentiation between the different strands of it. Because even I was reading just a paper of some of my staff before, where also there out of the differentiation was not as clearly made as it should be reasonable. The one is to, how to say, have a distributed ledger system, which for normal day-to-day money doesn't make sense. It's much too expensive in energy intensive to do it. So it's only for a huge amount is there. Or what also is happening that you have in the future this tokenization, which allows you to have a cheap way in order to map papers into something else and to keep it. I think that's an important part of it. But it doesn't make sense for the daily provisions. And what we have now is that we have, even in Austria, an increasing amount of payments to be made in digital form from one person to another. If you buy on the internet, they should say. And here the problem is in Europe that we are highly dependent on US companies. Visa and MasterCard transmit or interact about 80% there. And it's not only the 80%, which makes us very vulnerable to any kind of approach there. It's also very expensive for us because the amount of money of Visa and MasterCard sucking offer and exporting there, it's huge. It's huge. Perhaps you would say, well, there's few billions are there, but a few billions there. You know the rate of return, equity rate of return of what they get paid out to the capitals, Visa and MasterCard. I'm not sure what is the rate, declare number. What would you think? What would be the rate of return of Visa and MasterCard? 64%. Okay. I would also like to be an owner of that. So this means they get a lot of money, and there's a danger here we don't have accountability. And the question is, have we succeeded, has the banking system, going back again, succeeded in Europe to create a Europe-wide system in which we can transfer money in the digital form from one account to the other? No. We have for competing one, the European Payment Initiative failed, did not really deliver there. We have private one, and now, I'm sorry for those who hear my story again, but to show the importance about digitalization. If you have a card there and from your banker, and you go to any place in Europe, can you always pay? No. Others say it depends, and the country depends on the card. So you may happen to be in a place in which the card is not accepted. A little example of a real story.
To which countries do you travel?
I give you the story and then you can laugh. Or not, I don't know. This we had after an ECB meeting, we traveled on to Ghent because Belgium presidency, and some took the plane, some took the car. I took the car. We went on and we went in the direction of Ghent, and near Cologne we stopped the place. What all men do, what they do, they go to the restroom. And number one, the French governor took out his 3 cards, 4 cards, to the forehead, nobody allowed him to enter there. And then the Greek governor moved out and tried it as well. I had a €5 note, put it there and invited them and gave them €1. So a light overnight rate, they didn't pay it back to them. Just let you show that the most basic services cannot be done in Europe. Just to give you the point where it doesn't go. It's a true story.
I haven't been to a Belgian
No, this was in Germany, it wasn't in Belgium, this was in Italy, this wasn't in Belgium. So we have this problem there, and what it means is that we have, how to say, not autonomy there. So what the euro does is, the digital euro envisages is to simply to have a digital foreign, like what we have cash there. The question is then, what are the kind of other elements which could come to the table? What are the ones which we could use? Now, here I think stable coins are quite likely to make an impact there. Stable coins, how to say, are a form, if they're well done, in which they are a payment means which is backed up by real dollars and euros, and best with public bonds in the background. That's the way of best of doing it. Unfortunately, also in the US, this is what happened there. So it's not a digital euro, it's a more simpler form there. What likely will happen is already happened then, that the stable coins in the US, which is not to be confused with, how to say, crypto assets. They're not crypto assets, they're different. There are two different kinds of things there. The US is quite pushing this area, and the stable coins of the US is about 100 times bigger than the European currency. And this is part which is likely to make an important impact of us. So the importance is now, the European stable coins are very small. And my suggestion to the banking system is, the European banking system is that the European banks create a stable coin in euro, altogether in euro, because only then it will be large enough, because I'm convinced that US stable coins, and there are one or two, there's a network effect which are there. If there's one stable coin by the banking system in euro, it will be used alternatively in many of the developing countries, because if we only do it on the small part, it wouldn't work out. So my sense is we need a digital euro in order to have strategic autonomy. And here I agree, as long as we're independent, then secure privacy, and hopefully nothing almost happens. But in order to move against the stable coins US, we need to do that. And here again, the payment system can do it. But for the time being, in the past, they've not been able to do a common payment system. I hope this time they could do it. But I think this would be one way to move forward.
So there are three different concepts here, and I'll make remarks about both of them. First, digital transactions. And it is interesting how some developing countries are ahead of Europe. India, their government has provided a platform for transactions, electronic transactions. Europe could obviously have done that. You're absolutely right that Visa and MasterCard are outrageous. And well, I talked before about monopoly power. They have been attacked. I've been an expert witness involved in criticism of MasterCard and Visa. The case has been going on for 20 years. And it showed, justice, the latest justice denied. This is an extraordinary story of the difficulties of antitrust. They were found, guilty, ordered to pay a huge amount, and then there were legal conflicts over whether what they call injunctive relief was sufficient. So the court stopped the action because they believed that what they had agreed on was not adequate. And in the absence, nothing happens. So the delay has been because the court thought that they needed stronger action, and to get the stronger action, nothing happened. So we're waiting for an agreement now on the injunctive release. But there is absolutely no doubt that they have been a monopoly. Now, Europe has done a better job at regulating than the US. Not as good a job as Australia. And one can, have created a lot more competitive market. But I think the answer is, it is a public good. I think money is a public good, he believes it. And this is a transaction. And a well-functioning society should be able to provide that kind of service. Now, I'm not sure which of our countries is a well-functioning. U.S. is not dropped off the cliff, so I would not, for the reason you said, feel confident of having the U.S. government monitoring every transaction at the current time. So it raises some other issues. So that's the first, absolutely right. In a well-functioning society, the transactions, digital transactions should be on a public platform. But if you can't feel confident about that in a competitive, and we know how to get a lot more competitive than we have. The second one that I think is very easy is cryptocurrency. The
Cryptocurrency, the crypto assets, because they're not.
Well, crypto assets, crypto transactions. I mean, what I want to emphasize here is that, as Andreas will know, the thrust of regulatory efforts over the last 30, 40 years has been to create a transparent financial system. And that's important because bad things happen in secrecy. And, from all kinds of, tax evasion, tax avoidance, but, illicit behavior of all kinds. And we created a relatively transparent banking system, not perfectly, but relatively transparent. And then, having solved, made great progress on creating a transparent financial system, somebody comes along and says, here's a new way of doing things, digital, and we're going to make everything super secret. That isn't progress, that's regress. And just because it operates through a digital platform, doesn't make it good. So I would ban cryptocurrencies. I think they serve no socially, I think they're totally undermining society. So that's the second category. And the third one are stable coins. Stable coins are a ripoff. And I just wish I would, had gotten into this ripoff business earlier. I would feel guilty, but I would be rich, and you see, what is a stable coin? I give you money, and you give me back that money with zero interest. What a deal! As long as we live in a world where the interest rate is positive, and somebody says, I have an invention, I'll give you your money back. It's like we were talking about before, the century bonds. It's the same kind of mindset. You give me your money, and I'll give you the money back in 100 years at zero interest. Great deal. Anybody? I can do that with any of you in this room. And you call that a stable coin, and you feel so good about it. If you have a stable coin in dollars, why don't you buy a U.S. Treasury bill, a 30-year bond? that'll give you back the thing in dollars. And I can assure you, we don't know, we've talked about all the problems of Trump and independent central bank, but a stable coin gives you back the money in dollars. And so will the U.S. Treasury bills. It may not be worth anything, but it's back stable in dollars. So to me, stablecoin is a ripoff. My own view is if there are going to be ripoffs, they ought to be public. And so if you are going to engage, I feel bad about public robbery, like lotteries, where you exploit ignorance on the part of people. This is even worse than a lottery, because you're going to lose. There's no chance that you're going to win. And yet we celebrate them. So yes, if you have a president who's a thug and a government that is based on exploitation, corruption, then of course you need coins so you can, it's no longer any secret. We don't even have to have crypto. He's willing to publicly say, I've been bribed. So bribery is now officially legal in the United States. So you don't need crypto anymore, and stable gives you a huge way of doing it. But overall, I would prefer governments not ripping off their citizens.
You want to bring in some clarifications? Because there was some.
No, I agree with Joe. I mean, this whole stablecoin story in the US now is nothing but a way to generate demand for U.S. treasuries and to weaken the dollar. He wants to increase the demand for create a new market for an additional market for U.S. treasuries. So it's a completely different story than the crypto asset, the cryptocurrency, which is, there is some value in there because there's no value in it if you assume that all governments are good. If you're in a country where you like to have a way on protecting your assets from a corrupt or bad government, it has some value. But you can't print it. It's being destroyed by a lot of fraud all the time. But it's an amazing development because think about how people like Jamie Dimon or Larry Fink talked about crypto assets 15 years ago. It's the worst thing that can happen. We'll never do it. And now JP Morgan is deep into crypto. BlackRock is into crypto. Goldman Sachs is into crypto. Even Raiffeisen is now into crypto. Everybody else. So it's a total change. The verdict has not come yet. It will take some time.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure there's still some many open questions and views on it, but for this we open up now to you, the audience. Please hands up. Thanks. We wait for 1, 2, 3. Please. Micro.
Many thanks for these comments.
No, it's because it's recorded. I take them. Step up.
I'd like to come back to the common capital market. And Alpach with the bold ideas. I think we really need bold actions on that topic. Jimmy Dimon, in his recent trip to Europe, said, Europe, you are falling behind. In 2014, the European GDP was 95% of the US GDP. In 2024, it was 65%. I think part of the reason is not only new technology that has been developed in the US, but also a lot of capital that's stuck in the system. In Austria, and that's a well-known number, we have 350-some billion savings deposits. Now, a primary mission of banking supervision is to protect the savers. And we don't manage to get that kind of capital into the system. We don't manage still to complement our pension system with a capital markets-based addition. So I think it's very important to move that capital also for productive investment purposes. Otherwise, we just invest in US-based ETFs and export capital that way. We've discussed it before. I think we really need bold action, maybe also supported by the central bank in that direction.
Right. Thank you. Immediately transfer that. Here, please, number 2 in the middle is 3. Who takes 3 in a row? To come to take, please.
So my question would be, we have been now in a big inflation regime, and as the European or the Euro system is very heterogeneous. Every government reacted differently, so we have very, very different inflation numbers. And there is no exchange rate mechanism now. So if you had one very high inflation rate, it has a disadvantage competitively over the others, and the central bank can't really do anything about it. How do you see that? Is this a problem for the Euro system, or should we still keep increasing the number and the heterogeneity within the Euro system?
Well, thank you. And for the first one, number 3.
Thank you. Having said that, US dollar is going to be partially replaced and there seems to be a vacuum following that. And my question is, unlike US, there is no single treasury in Eurozone or unified bond market. And having this in mind, is Euro trusted enough to be the reserve currency? Because these are, I believe, the cracks even became more visible during the Eurozone debt crisis, particularly, let's say, the countries between Germany and Greece. And I believe this is the fact that impacts investors' decision when they decide to invest in currency. Thank you.
Okay, at this dispute now, you take the capital market question, show the inflation regime. If you know we have different inflation rates like Europe, what to do about it, and I take the last one with the single market ERSTE. Okay?
Well, I don't want to take too much time because I'm talking about capital markets all the time, but no question that we need it. And if my prediction will actually materialize at some point in time, we don't only need a European capital market, we need a European banking union, and we need finally to issue Eurobonds. If we don't do that, the euro will not become a reserve currency of the world. So we need to take that one more step, whereas creating a banking union is a pure political issue, and particularly the Germans have to give up their belief that they have to protect their banking system from the banking systems in Italy and Spain, and that their depositors have to then bail out the Italians or Spanish, forgetting that both the Spanish and the Italian banking systems are stronger than the German, whereas the capital market is a pure technical issue that cannot be dealt with by the European Union, that has to be dealt with by national governments, and that's why nothing is happening, because no national government is engaging in adapting its insolvency procedures or insolvency legislations to those in other countries, because that doesn't bring you votes. So we need a dramatic change on both sides. But if you sleep well and you get up in the morning in a good mood, you might believe it will actually happen.
Right. Thanks a lot. Just an introduction, because Austria is one of the victims of that. We have a much higher inflation rate than the rest of Europe, and the result of it, of course, problems emerge. So how does one handle this?
Yeah, before I answer, I want to make two other comments. One of them, very strongly agreeing that there is a need for this kind of capital market, but going into banking union. there was a proposal I talked last year, I remember at Albach, that Draghi had put on, the idea that there would be a way of incorporating a company as an EU company with a set of corporate governance laws and bankruptcy laws that would enable you sort of to
28 really.
yeah, I thought that was an interesting idea as a way of trying to get a legal framework that would facilitate that. Now, the other issue that's been raised is all the money flowing to the United States, and that's where the decisions are being made. One of the interesting things is right now is Trump is floating the idea of a tax on capital coming into the United States. And I think in response to the kind of aggressive stances that has been taking on globalization, Europe ought to be thinking about a tax on capital leaving Europe. Why not try to use the tax policy to keep capital allocation within Europe and using that network there's a network externality in having a large liquid market, and just like Russia really suffered because all the capital left Russia and left Russia without an economy. It's not so dramatic in Europe, but at least to think about the idea of having a capital outflow tax, and to encourage a support of the creation of not both capital market and banking, the role of Europe as in allocation. You can think about it as part of industrial policy. Now, on the issue of the differential inflation, that is the standard argument of why against the euro. That a single currency takes away an important instrument for adjusting, and Bob Mundell, who got the Nobel Prize allegedly for his work supporting the idea of the euro, wrote a famous paper where he argued that the conditions in which a group of countries could share a common currency was that they had to have enough similarity, notion of convergence. And the problem is that in Europe, there may not be enough similarity to make a single currency system work well. And some aspects of that have been very evident in the last 5 years, 3 years particularly, is the way you regulate electricity. And that just feeds into so many other aspects of the economy. The regulatory system for electricity is really badly flawed in Europe. And a few countries like Portugal and Spain have a better system. And that is one of the main reasons they have different inflation rates. And in my mind, rather than abandoning the euro, the right thing you ought to do is fix your electric regulatory system.
Yeah, it is actually, isn't it?
Many things to say. In Spain and in Portugal, it had to do that the electric grid was separated from the electric grid. It hasn't to do with the efficiency. The same thing you wouldn't be able to do in Europe, but it's a different side story then. To answer your question on the assets, I would love to do this. Yes, I would say it is important to have this as a part of it, but I don't think that the current political setup is to allow the creation of a common asset there, because in this case you would have first the proof that this public spending, centralized public spending makes sense. And if you recall, there was this resilience fund which was created, 750 billion for Europe. There's little view that this has had a major positive impact. So 750 billion put on the table, and for the time being, a lot of is about spent, and what has been spent has been spent well. Shows that a lot of reservation that the centralized public system of finance was doing a good job, at least where we are currently are, which is one of the reasons what happened. But there are positive alternatives there. And most recently, again, Olivier Blanchard came up again with the blue bonds. So having only small parts of it in order to create a common asset there makes a lot of sense. And the other element which we investigated recently in the papers coming up as we speak is to borrow from the US this use of mortgage-backed securities because in the US it makes a difference with regard to the efficiency of money transmission, and with regards to the common bond there, mortgage-backed security also play a role as a common asset there. It's 50% of the Fed holds mortgage-backed security, and it's also relevant for the banking system. So they're raised in order to go in this direction, because having a functioning centralized system may happen in the future, but it's not at the moment. I think we have now for the last round, Madam Milberg, and okay, one is two, please.
I would like to come back to the outrageous power struggle around the Fed, which is really something that Andreas was, I mean, we could not have imagined such a situation. My question to you is, and you decide how far you want to go, and the answer is, did power give up, and why did it give up now? And what is really the end game? I mean, the Fed and you said they want to inflate away debt. Is the US turning into an emerging market, and what does it mean for the rest of the financial market of the world?
Yeah. Okay, one and third. Yes, sir. Second question here.
Thank you very much. Since we are talking about being bold, and since we talked about, well, especially in Europe, developments within the last 10, 15 years that basically happens usually on state-to-state agreements, my question would be, since it's 18 years since the starting of the Lisbon Treaty as it is by now, is it time for a new European treaty that regulates especially those aspects we talked about, basically creating a capital market, creating Eurobonds and so on and so forth, since it's the independence of those institutions outside of the will of political leaders that is probably what is protecting a potential lead in Europe and the world within the next few decades. Is it time for a new treaty?
Sure.
So first, Trump is a real estate developer, always liked low interest rates. And, that was really, you just have to see. So, and is not a macroeconomist. So he would not understand the relationship between interest rates and inflation.
Yeah.
So, I think you just have to think about it in a very simplistic way. The second observation I'd make is that there are reasons why there are concerns about the weaknesses in the U.S. economy. There's inflation on the one hand, but the data on hiring is actually very weak. That the interpretation of the relatively low unemployment is that the labor force is shrinking because of the immigration policy, and it's actually worse than the numbers because people are afraid to go to work. We're very dependent on immigration labor, and the sense of fear is so great that people worry that they leave their apartment, they'll be arrested by ICE. Somebody in a mask will come and throw you into an unmarked car. So the the hiring, now, there's paralysis. Nobody knows what's going to happen with the tariffs, what's going to happen in any other dimension. And so firms are not hiring. And so there is a concern about weaknesses in the macro economy. The third observation I would make is, in principle, the central bank decisions is a committee of the 7 people who have federal appointments, and on a rotating basis, 5 of the 12 regional governors, and the regional governors are appointed by regional a regional framework, not totally democratic, but it is removed from Trump. There's no confidence that he won't overturn that whole system, which was always part of the bastion of independence. And people thought it was too independent, but it was part of the system of a very decentralized banking system. And it was a deliberate decision in 1914 when it was established, because it didn't want to centralize everything in Washington. And the question now is, will that be totally undermined by Trump?
Because things.
Fully agree. Yes, in order to be bold, Europe needs a fully fledged financial union, meaning we need a Eurobond system and we need a fully integrated capital market. And we need it fast. If we don't achieve that, old age poverty in Europe will become a dramatic problem. Because what you see now from those countries that actually have a functioning capital market, and there is no functioning capital market without a capital funded pension system, and you only have that in Scandinavia and in Switzerland. I would guess that the total investments of those 5 countries, so Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Switzerland together, probably in excess of 5 trillion, of which 2/3 go into the US because of the lack of a European capital market. People cannot invest in Europe. So Scandinavian and Swiss engineers finance the growth of the US economy. Imagine we had a fully fledged capital funded pension system in all other countries, in Germany, France, and Spain, Italy, and in Austria. And we would not have capital market in Europe in which we could invest. Then it's not 4 or 5 trillion that would go to the US, but it would be 20, 30, 40 trillion that would go from Europe into the US. So yes, we need it. And if we don't do that, one thing that we all have in common in Europe is a totally negative reproduction rate. And the trend is obvious. There will be more and more retired people in Europe that will have to live off the taxes of fewer and fewer workers and employees. And if we don't stop that trend, Europe is going to be in deep trouble. So yes, we need to be bold. We need a new European treaty, and we all have to wake up and be really in a good mood to believe in it.
Thanks, sir. Some last comments on this one. It would be great, to create this European capital market, but as I try to outline, unfortunately we are 15 years too late. Like to move now to this would take some 40, 50 years to bring later, but as I said, it would require to turn again from an unfunded system to funded, and the budgetary implications are too high. If you take the level of an unfunded system in Europe, in Austria it's about 250% of GDP. So if you want to turn half of it over into a funded system, you would have to pay back 125% of GDP in public debt. You tell me how this is going to happen. So it's a nice dream, but the macroeconomic side speaks against it. So we have to fudge something around the possibilities to fudge, but only do it. I would love to go in this direction, but the macro speaks against it. A second part which came up with regards to how to create Europe, make it stronger. There are ways in order to have a common, as I mentioned before, a common instrument capital market, which is not built on a common public finance system. And this is the way this is done. Other ways of doing it. Because at the moment, I cannot imagine that given where the French budget is, or where the other budget is, that to say you will get a consensus around how to organize it, unfortunately. But definitely, one needs to make sure that things improve. And here, I agree with the proposal. We have the need to deal with population aging, but I think there are ways of dealing with it, and this is my commercial. Will afterwards, after my next job, I started to work on it, and I hope how to say my research proposal gets financing. I think we have steps, as you used to expression, it is we have to build a single industry. You have to really make sure that there are ways in order to keep the labor market as the only way to do it. Migration, qualified migration, will be able to do one part. We will always think qualified migration, but we cannot. And we have to keep the annual labor market. And here it will work. But the other part also is that I think that we will have to rethink a little bit our greater preference for leisures. And somebody mentioned before, if we had our GDP of the past, US was so high, and we're about the same, and now the S is much higher, these are much lower. I give you another figure in order to show what is happening. If you take the 2019 figures of GDP per capita, uncorrected, you will have a difference between Austria and US of the level of 25%. If you correct it for price level differences, it comes down to some 70%. And if you correct it for hours worked, it comes down to how many percent? 2%. Because our hours worked is 1,550, US is 2,100. So, and this preference for leisure has increased. We can say that's the way how it is when it's accepted, but if not, we have also to take this into account in order to change it. And with this, I would like to thank you for your presence. The question, I had hoped to have a little bit more time to get to a question. I'd like to thank my old sparring partner, Joe Stiglitz, I would say, when he was chief economist, and I was had sort of a section, how to say, we quarreled quite a bit. But at the end of the day, we produced a book together, which, how to say, became quite widespread, and also was published in Chinese. That's the reason we have special relations to China. As always, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And the same applies to Andreas. I would say that in these different incarnations, it's always a pleasure to be here to come into the results. Thanks a lot, thank you, and I wish you a very productive stay outward, and I wish us, others, that some of our ideas that have come through and improve you and the world around. Thank you very much.